a lot of us burn out not because life got totally crazy, but because we've been neglecting ourselves for 25 years. Well, no wonder your system is shut down. You were taught a system, and then you woke up one day and you were like, what is this? Is this my life? Am I always going to feel like this? Right? But if your basic needs aren't met, you can't regulate.
I'm really excited to share that I am now offering one-on-one intentional living mentorship and coaching. So we can work together and use the modalities of yoga and mindfulness to help you learn how to deal with stressors, strengthen your relationship with yourself, and mindfully move towards your goals and the way you want to be in this world. So if you want to book a complimentary connection call to see if this is the right fit for you, there's a link in the show notes. I also want to take a moment to thank the beautiful, beaming members of our dream team who support the podcast every single month. You can join the dream team for as little as $3 a month, and that helps to support the operating costs of this podcast that make it possible. There's a link in the show notes to join. We would love to have you join the dream team, and thank you for making this offering possible. And one final thing. You can also join our intentional living community where we continue the conversations we have on the podcast and show up each week to share what it means to live with intention. This community is totally free, and there's a link in the show notes to join. Hi everyone, and welcome back to How the Wise One Grows. Today we are going to talk about something so important with Cait Donovan, and we're going to talk about burnout, which is a huge thing, a huge buzzword in the world today. So we're going to find out what burnout really is and what we can do about it. But before we get started, let's just take a moment to land here together with 3 deep breaths. So just take a moment to notice where your body makes contact with the earth. And if you aren't driving, you can gently rest your eyes or soften your gaze. Let your shoulders soften down the back. Take a big breath in, fill your chest, fill your belly with air. Exhale, open your mouth, let it out. Again, inhale, chest and belly expand. Exhale, let it go. One more inhale. And exhale. And return to that connection to the earth as you open your eyes and return to this space. So today we have Cait Donovan with us, and Cait is the host of FRIED the Burnout Podcast, and if you haven't listened to that, it will be linked in the show notes. You need to go listen. I just binged your podcast when I found it. And Cait is an international keynote speaker and author of the book, The Bounce Back Ability Factor. Cool word. Her creative burnout recovery solutions have been featured on podcasts, online magazines such as Forbes, NPR, and the New York Post, and in companies such as Clorox and Pepsi. Cait, thank you so much for being with us today. I honestly got a little fangirly when you said yes. I was like, yeah, so cool.
I'm so normal. I'm just a regular girl sitting in her cloffice. Excited
Can relate.
to be here. Yeah.
Cloffice, that's a perfect word.
I mean, literally, that's my door right behind my sign.
I'm in a
closet.
When I first started this podcast, I was in a closet with no light, and I had a lantern lighting me, and I was interviewing someone I didn't know. It was the first time it was an interview with someone random, and I was like, I need to change this because I think I'm scaring you.
I can't do this right now.
Yeah, they were like, oh, hi.
They're like, are you sure? Okay.
Yeah, you're really
my
doing this?
Has a window.
That's nice. That's a nice cloffice.
6 feet by 6 feet. So this is a massive walk-in closet that is in my guest room. And I don't need a guest that needs a closet this big, because if you need a closet this big, that means you live here now.
Yeah, that means you're not a guest.
You're not a guest anymore. So yeah, I stole it.
I love it. It's a perfect clophis.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Cait, do you mind? I just kind of want to dive in. I feel like we hear the word burnout all the time. And I think a lot is for good reason. And I think that there can be a lot of like misconception around what burnout actually is. For people who don't know, which honestly is probably like most of us, what is burnout actually?
So when we talk from this perspective, I always like to give the actual current definition from the World Health Organization so that we're all starting from the same place. This does not mean that I necessarily fully agree with the World Health Organization definition, but when we're doing anything science-based and science-related, we need to know that we're all talking about the same object, or else we're having two different conversations. So burnout, according to the World Health Organization, is an occupational hazard. So it is related to your workplace. This is reason number one I disagree with it, because it can be related to a lot of things. And it involves three components. These three components all must exist simultaneously and exist for, I think the rule is over 2 weeks for us to say that it's burnout. And those three components, the first one is physical and emotional exhaustion, which like half the podcast listeners just went, yeah, is anyone not physically and emotionally exhausted? Like, are you joking? The second one is cynicism and detachment. So feeling detached from people, feeling detached from what you do, being really cynical, being negative. My grandmother would call this being a negative Nancy. This is most commonly because we're talking about burnout as an occupational hazard, where this is in your workplace, which again, hard disagree, but World Health Organization has its own rules. And the third thing is, in the World Health Organization, it says lack of productivity. But in the people that did the research that supported the World Health Organization's definition, they say lack of impact, lack of meaning, lack of productivity, sort of this overall feeling that what you're doing doesn't really matter, no matter how much of it you do. So feeling like the thing that you are doing in the world is not useful to people, or you're not useful at it, or there's no value add in it, like this. So those three components all smashed together at the same time is what we're currently calling burnout. Now, my background is Chinese medicine. I've been an acupuncturist for nearly 20 years, which is weird to say. I didn't I don't know when that happened, but here we are. It's been 17 years. And so in Chinese medicine, we say that when stress affects the body, it affects your weakest points. So if you were in a car accident when you were 12 and got whiplash, when stress affects your body, you're likely to have neck tension and headaches because of this sort of weakness in your body. So you can have two different weaknesses according to Chinese medicine. One is constitutional, so genetic, basically. That would translate as sort of genetic. And the other is things that happen to you in your life that weakened part of your system. So if you have a really bad diet and you've had a bad diet for a long time, one of your burnout symptoms might be some digestive upset. So for me, all of these components must exist. And there's probably a set of symptoms that you have that are very closely related to your burnout process. But what those symptoms will be highly dependent on who you are, how you are, where you are, etc.
Yeah, I think that's so important to name, and that relation to Chinese medicine, I'm just enamored by. And I personally, listeners, I've probably shared this before, but when I was in college, I got shingles in my right eye and almost lost my eyesight. And to this day, when I am too stressed or overwhelmed or tired, like I feel that shingles pain, and that, that makes total sense that that's my weak link. That's where it's coming and saying like, whoa, girl, like calm down.
Exactly. And this is one of the things that we teach people to watch for. Like this is considered a burnout red flag. The symptoms that you know that repeat. But most of us at a certain age, we've had a symptom that we've had on and off for 20 years. We mostly ignore it. But what we need to understand is that when it flares up, that's something to pay attention to, not just the symptom. I was going to say the hip, but that's talking about me. Not just
my hip too.
Yeah, right. It's like not just the symptom, but the life attached to the symptom. And this is the
what do
thing
you mean
that
by
we miss.
the life attached to the system? symptom.
when I say that, what I'm thinking about is the fact that if your body is reacting in some way and telling you, so if your eye is acting up and that's saying there's too much stress, when my hip acts up and that says that's too much stress, now I have to look at what's the too much stress. Because how many of us are like, well, I'm good at handling stress. I don't feel stressed. By the way, you guys, stress is not an emotion. It's not something you can feel. It's a state that you are in or you are not in. Not an emotion. Not an emotion, everybody. So you might say, I don't feel stressed. Well, I don't care if you feel stressed or not. Your body is giving you a very clear signal that something's not right.
That's so important to name, because I distinctly remember when I actually had like a reoccurrence of shingles almost 10 years to the day, which is when your immunity kind of runs
freaky,
out, which is just so freaky. The first time I knew I was stressed. And then this, like I could pinpoint looking back what was happening in my life that was making me feel stressed. This time I couldn't. I was like, man, I thought I was like taking care of myself. Mentally, I didn't think I was stressed, but like, doesn't matter. My body was clearly telling me like, yes, not okay. Time to pump the brakes.
When I see people in a space that are having stress-based bodily reactions that don't understand that they're stressed, my questions start in on, are there things in your life right now that you're doing that you feel like you have to do because you have to pay your bills or whatever, that are actually not aligned with your values? Are you building, especially when I'm working with entrepreneurs, like, are you building your business in a way that is truly actually aligned with your values? I actually work with a lot of other burnout coaches that are burnt out, right? And I'm like, well, you started this business when you were still burnt out, and then you thought that you had to work full time in order to create it. But that's not the business you wanted to run. You wanted to run a business on 3 days a week. So if you want to run a business on 3 days a week, you have to build a business on 3 days a week. So things like that, like, what's going on here that's less obvious? Where is there a values mismatch? Where are your priorities a little bit off? Where have you decided intentionally to make a sacrifice about something that you're not paying yourself back for because you think the payout is coming in 5 years or 10 years or whatever? People that are on the FIRE program, the what's it called? Financial Independence, Retire Early. Right? People that are on the FIRE path burn out frequently because they're not allowing themselves any joy, because they're going to get joy in 3 years. They're going to get joy in 5 years. They're going to get. So have you put your joy and your peace off for something? Is there a value like, I'd be digging into questions like this. I wouldn't say, is there something stressing you out in your life? Because if you knew that, you would know that already, but you don't know that. So what's the internal friction that's happening that we can bring to awareness so that we can do something about it?
The way you're talking about that too, so this podcast, we talk a lot about mindfulness. And to me, it just really sounds so much of like needing to be rooted in the present. Like it's about what you're doing, how you're feeling right now, and then attuning to your, like you're saying, your values, and living in alignment with that, where you are in this moment, not what was happening yesterday, not what you wish for tomorrow, but like what your body needs now.
Well, and just before we started, we were talking about, pee when you have to pee. Like this is the unofficial tagline of my podcast. And there's one part we would dig into the values and into those frictions and see what's going on. The other part is, are you doing really fabulous self-care but missing out on all the foundational stuff? Because most people are. So the foundational stuff is peeing when you have to pee. Like, did you not ask your partner to wait for an extra 60 seconds and you held your bladder and got in the car for a 30-minute car ride instead of saying, hey, I'm just going to run to the bathroom before we go? Are you doing that? Are you drinking when you're thirsty? Are you eating when you're hungry? Are you resting your eyes when you're tired? Are you moving when you're antsy? Are you meeting your foundational needs? Because those foundational needs, what they do is build a skill and a function of your brain called interoception, which is your basic ability to notice what's going on in your body and respond appropriately. Your body does a lot of this automatically. When it's too hot, you sweat, right?
Mm-hmm.
Stuff like that. We regulate heartbeat and breath rhythm and etc. But some of it we have to do for our bodies, and a lot of it we just don't show up for. So sometimes the questions end up being like, did you avoid pooping today even though you had to? And it
Real
sounds
question.
silly. Yeah, like it sounds silly, but if you do that every day, then your body starts to think, oh, I'm not safe here. And your stress response system kicks in.
Mm. And I teach a lot of wellness things, and I was talking about this with someone too, where I was like, it feels silly and sad that we have to like tell people like, hey, meet your basic needs. But unfortunately, like we really do have to tell people that and remind people that, because society is telling us so much the opposite. It's saying like, don't eat those things. Don't eat till you're satisfied. Like push, 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 go, go, go. Don't rest it. Like we are being fed all these other things. Like if we could, we put deodorant on, antiperspirant, so we won't sweat when maybe our body needs to sweat. Like there are all of these things that we are like actively being forced on us to like go against what our body is telling us and what it needs. So like, yes, it sounds silly to like be reminded to meet your body's needs. And like, it's almost like we have to unlearn what society has been telling us and relearn like our inner wisdom and our bodies and our knowing in that language. And it's okay if you aren't attuned to that. Like that's not something to build shame about, because everything around you is telling you not to listen to that.
Yeah, I have 25,000 people a month listening to Fried. They love the tagline. They don't love the tagline only because it's silly. They love the tagline because it's true. I had somebody DM me and say, the sentence, pee when you have to pee changed my life. The sentence, not the podcast, not the 250 episodes that we've spent the past 5 years creating. The sentence changed my life. And we override things because of these external circumstances. We also override things because we were taught to. When I'm a little bit older than you, so it already changed by the time you were in school a little bit. But when I was in school, you raised your hand and asked to go to the bathroom. The teacher would say no often. So you couldn't even go if you wanted to. I also was a competitive gymnast for 10 years. Pain?
So was I.
Were you? Like pain?
Yeah.
Who cares? Nobody cares about your pain. Wrap your ankle and keep going. I knew how to tape an ankle like a pro when I was like 8. That's not normal.
Yeah.
So, of course, it's not your fault if you don't know how to pay attention to those things. And this is a slight tangent, but and if you had any sort of adverse childhood experiences, those are called ACEs, big A, big C, big E, little s, ACEs, during your childhood development, your brain, the part of your brain that's responsible for interoception, might not have developed properly. So you really might just actually not have this skill. If you practice it, that part of your brain will develop, so you can still do it as an adult. But this might really not be your fault. If you grew up in poverty with a parent who was abusive in some way, shape, or form, or neglectful in some way, shape, or form, or you had a parent who was chronically ill or incarcerated or had a mental disorder or was not present because they had to work 3 jobs to pay the bills, or we could go on and on about what all the ACEs are. But if you had some of those things or multiples of those things in your life, there's a high chance that your interoceptive skills are naturally poor. And you actually have to work on them on purpose. And when you do, this is fascinating. The science behind this is wild. When you focus on peeing when you have to pee and drinking when you have to drink and eating when you're hungry, etc., your emotional regulation skills improve without you even doing anything, without working on your mindset, without doing any therapy, you learn to better emotionally regulate when you learn to better physically regulate. Happens automatically. It's like magic, everybody.
See, me and my husband get at this a lot. We're like, I get hangry. Like, if I am hungry, I am a monster. And like, I can try, like I teach yoga, I teach mindfulness. Like I can try all my self-regulation things, but I cannot.
I actually just need food.
I just need food. And he always says, it's not an excuse, but I'm going to bring this back and be like, this is evidence. You have to take care of your body in order to regulate. You can't regulate if your basic needs aren't being met.
Ta-da! That should be the most important thing that we say today.
Yeah.
Right? You just said you can't regulate if your basic needs aren't being met. That's it. A lot of us burn out not because life got totally crazy, but because we've been neglecting ourselves for 25 years. Well, no wonder your system is shut down. No wonder. It's not your fault. You didn't do this on purpose. You were taught a system. You used the system. It probably worked for a lot of things for a long time. So you kept doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And then you woke up one day and you were like, what is this? Is this my life? Am I always going to feel like this? Adulting sucks. Right? But if your basic needs aren't met, you can't regulate.
Yeah.
This is why I actually don't talk about mindfulness and mindset all that much on my podcast. Not because I don't know how powerful it is. I've read all the studies. My background is what my background is, like whatever. But the people that end up burnt out, that's sometimes a step too far for them. That's something that comes later in the burnout recovery process. That's something that, yes, needs to happen, but that's 14 months into recovery. That's not week 1. It's way too hard. And we think that's the basics, and it's not.
Mm-hmm. That's so important to name. And you just said 14 months into recovery. So I just want to kind of backtrack for a minute.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
I bet people have some questions around that. And one, maybe just taking it a step further back of how do you know when you're truly burnt out versus experiencing fatigue? Because we talked about that World Health definition. Those 3 components need to be happening at once for more than 2 weeks. Are there other things that can help you identify when you're burning out so that you could even stop it before it's too late? Or if you're man, I really think this is it.
Yeah, so I don't actually believe in burnout prevention very much, unless you've already been burnt out and you're preventing it for the second time. The reason I don't believe in burnout prevention is that most of us that end up burnt out don't have that interoceptive skill. So by the time we're actually paying attention, it's too late. And it's not I don't want people to feel guilty for getting there when the world is you could have prevented it if you just paid attention to. You couldn't pay attention to those things because your brain is not primed to pay attention to those things because your development happened in a way that said no to that. And that it almost has nothing to do with you. It's nature and nurture from your childhood development years that you had no influence over. So I feel like you need to know that burnout's not your fault. You need to know that if you're wondering if you're there, it's probably too late. And the recovery process is 12 to 18 months typically. But the line in the sand between I'm just tired or I'm just stressed and burnt out is one that's really clear to me. And it took me a couple years to figure this out. But the line in the sand is this. If you are tired or stressed, you can take 3 days off, do a staycation, get your house vacuumed and get your stuff organized. And then maybe you're not dying to go back to work on Tuesday, but you're rested, you've recovered, you feel like a human again. And you go to work on Tuesday and you're basically okay. When you're burnt out, you could sleep for a month and still feel tired. And be why am I not recovering? When you're burnt out, it doesn't feel like you ever recover because you don't. Your sleep doesn't do the same detoxing that it's supposed to do. All the glial cells in your brain, all the mitochondrial waste, all of that stuff doesn't get cleaned out because your body doesn't have the power for it. Your gut bacteria is all messed up. Your muscles are atrophying. There's all this stuff going on. You don't have enough rest or peace in your life to recover, to restore your body. So you don't restore. So you try and you try and you try and you're like, I can't. I just took a vacation. I feel worse. That's burnout.
I appreciate that explanation so much. And it does really connect with what you said earlier about why you don't talk about mindfulness very much, because it isn't about the mind. It is about the body and our body's basic functions needing to go through and process to take care of us so we can be a human in this human body, in this human life.
And then work on our mindsets so that we can interpret life differently and deal with stress differently. And so, yes, the mindset. Yes.
But like you said at the beginning, that right. preliminary step first, we can't like skip that step. We have to go back to the basics.
Yeah.
So this is a question that someone sent in about burnout and financial security. And I'm just going to play it because I think it's so, so important.
I would love to know what advice you have for dealing with burnout, specifically as it's linked to financial scarcity. I'm someone that has dealt with financial scarcity and believing that I have to work myself into the ground in order to have enough resources, which obviously then leads to me getting sick and my body having issues or my mental health being so low that I actually can't then work. And so I guess I've had a hard time kind of knowing when it's time to put on the brakes and back up a little bit before I get to that point of complete burnout. And I would love to know if there are any advice you have or any maybe signs to look for before you're at the point of no return of like, oh my gosh, I can't go into work one more day. I'm just drowning. Because I feel like sometimes for me personally, when I am feeling good and healthy, it's a really slippery slope for me to then start to be like, well, if I pick up one more shift a week, then I'll have this much money I can put into savings, or I can buy this thing that I need, or I could go on that trip later on. And inevitably what happens is that then by the time later on comes around, I am sick or really burnt out or very much not okay mentally. And yeah, so I'm just wondering, I'm in my personal life and in my professional life trying to figure out the balance of making sure that my needs are met and I'm okay and I'm doing enough while knowing when to cool it before I get to the point of wanting to just drop everything and feel totally burnt out.
This is an amazing question that I think actually has two parts. The first thing she asked is, what's the deal with burnout and financial security? And the second thing she asked was, how do I notice it within myself before I get too far? Which I just said I don't really believe in burnout prevention because most people don't have that skill. So a little bit of this answer has already come out. But let's start with the burnout and financial security piece. Financial security is trauma. Financial insecurity is a trauma. So let's just start with that.
It's so important to name.
Financial insecurity is a trauma that is very closely linked to how your brain developed in childhood. So first we need to deal with that. That might mean therapy, it might mean EMDR, it might mean shaking and dancing, it might mean whatever method you want to use to move through things that are stuck in your system. Use them. I'm trauma informed, but I'm not a trauma therapist. But there are people who are. But that needs to be dealt with because that's actually much more serious than we want to give it credit for. Because when you have financial insecurity trauma, it doesn't actually ever matter how much money you have. It doesn't change it. It doesn't matter how much money you have. For that portion of how much money you have and how much is enough, etc., and what you need, my question to that person, were they a one-on-one client, would be, what kind of systems do you have in place for budgeting? How do you keep track of your money? Do you know where all of it is? Because a lot of people with financial insecurity don't really know what's going on with their money all the time because they're afraid to look at it and they're afraid to know. So I think part of you have to deal with the emotional piece of it while you do this. You can't just do this part. But I use YNAB, which is You Need a budgeting software, and I let it teach me how to set my business up and set myself up for a long term so that I can have those feelings of safety. I now know how to keep enough money in my bank account to have 3 months of expenses. for my business, right? My personal banking is separate, but for my business, so that all of my bills are covered and things like that. There's a number in YNAB that you can click on. It gives you a report that's called Age of Money, and it tells you basically how much time passes between the day you get money and the day you spend money. And the higher that number is, the more financial security you have. So sometimes what I find happens that with people that have financial insecurity is they get a mini windfall, a tax return or something, and then they splurge instead of giving themselves a buffer for another time. So I think first we need to deal with the emotional stuff around the trauma. Second, we need to create a really clear system for how you're going to save and spend money, where you're going to splurge, because I believe in splurging and joy and all of, like, I want you to go on vacation and I want you to enjoy everything. So let's figure out how we can work that in. And then let's really look at all of your expenses and figure out where your money's going, why and how and when, so that we can plan it. YNAB allows you, for instance, like if you pay your car insurance twice a year, it has you set money aside monthly so that when the bill comes in, you have all of that money for that bill. So that you're not like, oh, shoot, I forgot it's my car insurance and now I need an extra $1,000. So I have to pick up 2 shifts. And the reason I'm talking so much about this piece is because I hear you, because I have that trauma. I grew up that way. And I worked shift work throughout college. I was a bartender and a waitress. So I just got to pick up a shift. I know this world deep in my soul because this is how I lived my life for the majority of it. Still the majority, not for long, but still the majority. The second piece of that is how do I, and I'm going to change the question a little bit. I think the true question is, how do I start to notice when my capacity is waning instead of only notice what my bank account is doing? So this question to me, I don't know what your capacity noticers are. We call these capacity noticers in my business. And for some people, you'll start to get a little more clumsy. For some people, your insomnia will kick up. For some people, you'll start to be irritable. And for me, it's always resentment. Resentment is my capacity notifier every time, right? So I don't know what your capacity notifiers are because I'm not living your life, and I wish you were on the call with us because I would love to have this conversation with you.
I know.
Let's figure out, what you need to figure out is what your personal capacity notifiers are. When does your body ding like a phone does to let you know that your battery is down to 20%? Like, what are the things that happen? Do you swear more? Do you forget words? Do you lose your keys? Do you trip more? Do you go the wrong way in your car because you go somewhere that you go all the time instead of the place that you were supposed to be going? Do you stop cooking food and eat out a lot? Do you take shorter showers? This is a big one for me. When I'm overwhelmed, when there's a lot going on, I'm like a tits and bits girl, and then I'm out.
Tits and bits.
Tits and bits. I got to get out of here. When I start to feel like I don't have enough time to clean myself, that's a signal to me now that my capacity has gone down, that I need to look at my schedule, look at my life, and make some adjustments. The other little piece of that is grooming is one of the ways that we signal safety to our nervous systems, because you're not going to ever do your hair and brush your teeth and pick at your skin and put oil on. You're not going to groom when you're being attacked. So the very act of grooming helps your body to restore itself. So if you're doing tits and bits, not only are you not taking a good shower, not only are you rushing yourself and feeling this massive sense of urgency, but you're also missing out on an opportunity to tell your body, like, hey, we've got time, we're safe. Like, I got this schmancy new Pacha whipped, body scrub that smells like chai tea. Is the best thing on the planet, right? That action is more than just that action. That action is a super signal to your body that says, we're safe, we're good, we got time, everything's okay.
Is that like giving yourself a little oxytocin boost? Like, just turning
oxytocin.
on that?
Did you have to do that to me, Holly?
I had to do it. I had to.
Did you have to do it to me? Do you know how I feel about oxytocin? Have you heard this?
No.
Oh, boy.
Oh, man.
Oh, man. So should we
rip.
listen to another question or should we just dive into this?
How long can it be a quick dive?
Yeah, it can be a quick dive. We'll do 3 minutes or less.
Okay.
Oxytocin has a flip side. Oxytocin is not just the love hormone. Oxytocin is our social signaling hormone. It tells us whether we should include people or exclude people. It's not only about love and affection. People think that. It's not true. So if we are in a group of people and we have bonded and our oxytocin together is high, so say it's me, you, and 3 other podcasters in the wellness space, and we're like, I love you, I love you, I love you, we're amazing. And then somebody walks over and has a little bit of an attitude. We are more likely as a group to attack that person as an invader because of our oxytocin bond. So oxytocin can make us dangerous. Oxytocin has claws. So we have to be careful about that. The grooming in particular, I don't know what the neurochemical association is. Something that I haven't actually looked up, but now I will. But I don't think that it's an oxytocin thing. It could be an oxytocin thing, but I'm not sure. But I just need everybody to know that oxytocin is not only rainbows and butterflies.
That's so important. I've never heard that about oxytocin.
I know,
before,
and it's like
so
it's not even new information. It's been out there forever, but I don't know. I feel like I'm the only person that talks about it. One of my keynotes is called The Biology of Belonging. Because I need to, like, people are like, we need to just focus on belonging. Everybody belongs. And I'm like, yeah, but your body doesn't think that. A new person comes in and your body, for reasons unknown to you, will flip oxytocin off to say, no, keep that person out. This person is not safe. Maybe they look like somebody that hurt you 20 years ago and you don't even remember. I don't know. But oxytocin has got a flip side, so we should know that. 2 minutes.
Very noted. Well done. Snaps. So this next question is from the same person who, listeners, you know this. This is Kelly. She's from our Most Embarrassing Stories episode, and she is, like, I call her the chef's kiss of a human.
I would love her.
She's perfect.
Yeah.
You would love her. Like, she was devastated. She wrote down the time wrong. But this question leans into a lot of what we talked about a bit earlier, but I just want to hold some space for this.
It feels to me like growing up, there was an emphasis on almost being rewarded for getting to that point of burnout. Like it meant that you were strong if you were pushing, doing as much as you possibly can, being as productive as possible, not taking anyone else's help, not taking a break. And so I guess I'm curious about, where we learned that, where that kind of came into play, and also how to do some unlearning as an adult now who is trying to kind of reframe and restructure the narrative with mental health being a big important one. I'm very grateful that we seem to be collectively in society we're more aware of mental health being an important thing and needing to be talked about and listened to. But, I'm in my early 30s. I also grew up in a place where it was really like, it's pretty, it's noble, I guess, to really just like work almost until you work yourself into the ground. And so I guess I'm curious, like, where that came from in our society, and if you have any specific thoughts on kind of how to unlearn that as an adult and how to reframe that.
There is an episode of FRIED that is with doctors Erin Hinson and Kristen Donnelly. And that
I'll
episode,
link that in the show notes.
Yeah, it's that episode explains how the Puritan culture, when we left the UK, that was not my family, but when people left the UK and came to New England and started America, the Puritanism that was baked into our new culture gave us these ideas. So this is not new, this is old. If you look at American top 10 cultural values currently, you'll find on that list 2 of the top 10 values are hard work and individualism. So these are baked into our culture hardcore. So we need to know that that's true. And we need to redefine, instead of, sometimes it's about unwinding what's happening in our bodies. And sometimes it starts with the mindset piece of redefining what those things mean. I don't mind working hard the day of a keynote, but the day after a keynote, I'm probably getting a massage. Like I've
as
found
you should,
as one should, right? So you have to know what your values are very clearly. Your values, you have to dig into this. You've got to do values exercises like 8 times, because the first 7 times you're lying. If you've done a core values exercise and you only did it once, you're lying. And not because you want to, just because the first answers that you give are the ones that are expected, the ones that are nice, the ones that are considered good, the ones that you have some sort of moral agreement with, even if you don't believe them or don't feel them. So you need to know what your values are, and then understand how to apply hard work according to your values. It's okay to work hard, as long as it is in alignment with where you're going and what you're doing. And I don't believe that it's in alignment with what anybody is doing to create illness. That's not what that means we've gone too far. So if you have to know how to define these things. You need to know how to define hard work. You need to know how to define individualism, which is a whole separate conversation. And you need to know how to define success. Oftentimes with my clients, I have them write their own eulogy, which sounds really morbid. But if I die, when I die, if somebody stands up there and reads something about how much I sacrificed, I will be furious. Every single obituary eulogy that says things like, she gave up everything for her family, is like not what I want. So I can't act like that if that's not what I want. If that's what you want, that's fine with me. I'm not saying that we shouldn't want that. I'm saying I don't want that. I want people to say that I had fun. I want people to say that I was fun to be with. I want people to say that I took advantage of joy, that I grabbed everything that life gave me and used it because it was fun, that I still managed to provide a service to people that was incredibly helpful, but not at a cost to myself. Not at a cost to my joy or my generosity. So, what are your values? What are your values? Not Americans' values, not your mother's values, not your grandmother's values, not the values you think other people should have. What are your real values, and how can you live according to those? But none of this is your fault. This is all baked into our culture.
That values check is something I feel like on so many of these conversations we keep coming back to, because it's so easy to get flooded with what society says in aligning those as your values, when that's not necessarily true to the authentic you, and that's not living with intention with who you truly are and the life you want to create and build. And if I'm understanding correctly, I think that what you're saying a lot is that burnout, to not burn out doesn't mean you don't work hard. You can work hard and not burn out if you are practicing interoception, taking care of your body's basic needs, knowing your values and taking aligned action in that, and working towards a purpose that feels meaningful to you and is highlighting your gifts and you can see the benefits. But we often are I even notice this right now, this podcast is so in alignment with my values, and that Mean Girl soundtrack in my head is trying to get me to burn out, because she's you should be doing it this way, blah, you're not working in this structure and that's wrong. And meanwhile, if I just know that what's going to work for me is going to look different, and there is financial insecurity that comes with this, and taking care of myself in the other ways, focusing on having I always set imaginary zeros for myself to that's my security blanket. I have my imaginary zeros to let myself explore and do what I need to do in a way that feels authentic. as I figure it out. That doesn't mean like I'm not still stressed about things, but it feels better. And it's less likely to lead to that road if I cannot let that other voice.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you can buffer some hard things if you're taking care of yourself in a way that allows you to buffer some hard things. Like you have the energy. That's what bounce back ability is about, right? You're not always standing in the middle. Sometimes you're going to get thrown to the left. The problem isn't getting thrown to the left. The problem is not being able to return to center. So it's not about not having hard things happen. It's not about, it's about the ability to come back. The ability and the flexibility to come back. This is, people call this resilience. I just hate that word. But I think that's important. And I think also it's important to say, because there are some people out there right now that are fighting against this line of reasoning. And they're saying, well, there's some things in my life that I have to do and I don't have a choice. Like, I hear you, Sheila. I get what you're saying. Let me tell you this. There's things that all of us do that we don't want to do and we don't have a choice, that don't feel aligned with our values, but sometimes we have to make that choice. When we do make that choice, when you say, this does not line up with my priorities, it doesn't line up with my values, there are other reasons that I'm going to do it, to support my partner, because I'm broke and I have no choice, like I have to pay a bill or else I'm going to lose my house, or whatever the situation is. When you have to compromise on your values, when you have to martyr yourself, when you have to make a sacrifice, because it's going to happen in life, my rule is that you find a way to pay yourself back. Understand and recognize and acknowledge that you are making a sacrifice. You are making it intentionally and for good reason. Don't blame anybody. If you decide to, don't blame people. Make the decision and own it. And then on the other side of it, find a way to pay yourself back. Sometimes that involves finances, sometimes it doesn't. I really love having a clean desk. Sometimes I pay myself back by taking a half an hour off in the morning and cleaning my desk. One of my clients loves a blowout. She pays herself back with a blowout. I also love breakfast by myself at a restaurant. I don't know what it is about breakfast by myself at a restaurant, but I really enjoy that. So I pay myself back that way. It's $17. It's okay. Like, it's all right. Yeah. And so you can pay yourself back with anything from a spa day to an extra yoga nidra meditation that's free on Insight Timer in the morning. I don't care what it costs or what it is or how it fuels you. I care that it matters to you, that it fuels you, that it feels good to you, and that you're doing it intentionally to pay yourself back for a sacrifice that you made intentionally and by choice. Because you know that you deserve to be refueled.
It's just sounding so much like fierce self-compassion to me. Like it's fierce, like advocacy of yourself. Like we are going to have to do hard things. We live in this society that we live in. Money is money. It's all there. It's not going to be perfect in sunshine and daisies. And we have to continually like advocate for ourselves because no one knows you truly but you and what you truly need but you. So you have to like be your advocate and make time for what you need. And like, you're right. Like resentment is one of my flags. Like you can't blame someone else for something you chose to do. If you choose to do it, you got to refill that cup. So we had one more listener send in something.
So I feel like I've been preparing for a major burnout since I was in high school. I'm 33 now and also experiencing that burnout at the same time. I'm very thankful that I have a time right now where I can deeply rest and don't have to work full time, but it's still tough to not be productive all the time or subscribe to a expected 9 to 5, 40-hour work week. So 2 things I'd like to know are how can I support myself through a rest period after burnout? And then what signs are there when I'm coming out of burnout? I don't want to get back into my old habits of overworking myself. So how can I kind of ease back into it?
Yeah, the beginning is do the things that we've been saying for the rest of the episode. If you had time to rest and now you're feeling a little more rested, now's the time to dip into your foundational self-care. Now's the time to find out, am I really doing that? Am I showing up for myself that way? Do I have my own back? And then you need to figure out what your values are. You can't show up to a new workplace and know if you're aligned if you don't know what your values are. That's just not possible. So you need to know that ahead of time. You need to also start. This sounds funny coming from a burnout specialist, and I don't mean in very big ways, but you need to start to venture out and push yourself a little bit so you can find out where your edges are. A lot of times people in my Facebook community will say, I did too much and now I have to rest and I'm so upset with myself for doing too much. So, well, how else were you supposed to find out where the line was?
I'm a potter, and it's like the best potters are the ones who tear through their pieces because you know that line.
Right? It's like that's you're gonna bump up against it sometimes. My ask is that you go gentle with yourself, please. You're gonna bump up against it. When you bump up against it, I want you to reverse engineer it and say, was there a capacity notifier that happened before this that I didn't see? Let me go backwards in my day. Was there some indication that I was on this path that I didn't notice? You'll find one the more often you look. And then when you learn what they are, you'll be able to take action sooner. But you're not going to be able to take action sooner until you bump against the wall a few times, until you bruise yourself a few times. You can't do it any other way. And people don't like to hear this because I'm not a rainbows and unicorn kind of coach. I'm not going to tell you that you can recover from burnout and then shoot rainbows out of your bottom for the rest of your days. Like, that's just not what life
would be
like.
cool, though.
Would be really cool. It's like a really cool superpower, but it's probably not going to happen. So you're going to bump up against things. What if you went into it saying, when I find myself bumping up against something, I'm going to reverse engineer it to see if there's a signal that was a little earlier that I can pay attention to. And I'm going to be really proud of myself for knowing that I bumped up against it. And then I'm going to pay myself back, even though I didn't choose to bump up against it necessarily because I wasn't aware. When I bump up against something, I'm going to pay myself back. And then I'm going to pay attention again the next day and see how it goes. That's it.
That's learning. That's growth.
That's learning.
Yeah. Cait, thank you so much. I feel like I could talk to you forever about this, but I will make myself stop. For those listening, I will have Cait's podcast linked in the show notes. You need to go listen. There are tons of episodes, also helpful. And I'll also have all of Cait's links in there. Cait, is there anything you want to share about how people can work with you and support your work?
I think the podcast is the best place to find us. What you should know about what's available to you is there's two major portions. One of them is B2C, which means business to consumer, which means if you are a burnt out person, we do offer group programs for burnout recovery, and those function on a waitlist system. So we fill our waitlist. Once our waitlist is full, we start a new program. So when we start a program is dependent on you, not on some random calendar date that we chose just because. So getting on the wait list for Unfried will ensure that one starts sooner rather than later, and you can join. Every group is no bigger than 7 people to make sure that we have enough time, that Sarah has enough time with each person. The other thing is, if your company is a mess or you have a conference coming up, that's where I show up. Sarah does all the group programming, and I do all the flying over the country and telling people to get their acts together in their businesses so that they're not burning people out.
Need that.
So if there's if there's an ERG that you're a part of, or there's a Women's Leadership Day that you're a part of, and you think that this message could be useful, you can reach out to me through my website at caitdonovan.com.
Awesome. Cait, thank you so much. Thank you for the work that you're doing and helping us all gain that bounce back ability. I so appreciate you.
Holly. Thank you for having me.
So reviews are like gold in the podcast world because it's what talks to the algorithm gods and helps to make this podcast appear in other places so more people can find it, which is what we want. We want this podcast to share far and wide for the people to hear. So I'm going to read a recent review, and if you leave a review, it would mean the world, and I will share it on the podcast as well. This review said, Holly is so well-spoken and insightful. Her episode about girlfriends, which is episode 12, you can link it in the show notes, made me so grateful for all those in my life. She's so gracious and finds the good in everyday situations. This podcast has brought me peace and joy, and every new episode is a breath of fresh air. I'm always looking forward to the next time I can hear her tranquil voice.